What they used to do in medieval times, they would put a witness in a bag of rocks, throw the witness on the rocks down into the water. The witness came back up, he's telling the truth. Otherwise, if he drowned, he's guilty. You got young children, 3, 4 years old, and they're being taught how to lie. Tell them Daddy's not here, or tell them Melvin's not here. Lie to the basic inspector. And these kids grow up with that. So, they're behind the 8 ball before they ever get to school even. It's a philosophy I hold today. You do not wrap them up in the criminal justice system, because all they're going to do is learn how to commit more crime. They're not going to be rehabilitated. You're just poisoning them. You get one judge as opposed to another judge, and even locally. Certain judges have predispositions toward ruling in favor of government, whatever it is. But depending on who you get, you're going to either win or lose that case. Minorities, historically, will never have anywhere near the adequate peer representation when they are facing trial, either civilly or criminally. From the liberal vantage point, I think that people would say this is a good example of if you provide the opportunity to people, then they will use it wisely and then be successful and so on. Nobody wants to think that, dirt to dirt, mud to mud, and when I'm gone, that's it. You'd like to be able to say, I can't wait to see my parents, I can't wait to get to the hereafter for whatever reason, right? That's why prayer is such comfort, if you can internalize and believe it,
On this week's show, we bring you the fascinating story of Ronald Benjamin, who went from being a teenage outlaw and spending time in prison to eventually passing the bar, becoming attorney at law. It was the guidance of an English teacher at Green Haven Correctional Facility that pushed for him to attend college, and for Ron, it was the best decision he's ever made. For more than 40 years, he's practiced law in the state of New York as a general practitioner, advocating tirelessly for his clients. Ron discusses his take on the jury selection as well as the fairness of the justice system. So, without further ado, I bring to you Ronald Benjamin.
Welcome to another edition of American Real. This is Roger Brooks. My special guest today is Ronald Benjamin. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Attorney at law, and you've been practicing now for how long?
Over 40 years.
Over 40 years. That's wonderful.
A long time.
A lot of cases in that time.
Yes, sir.
And are you categorized as a defense attorney?
General practitioner. At one point, I think it's called Broom Legal West, because we represent a lot of people that simply don't get representation in the general mill of lawyers, the bottom rung of the economic ladder.
Okay.
And I used to do a lot of criminal, then I got into doing a lot of civil, lately we've got a pretty heavy criminal load, so it's a general practitioner. Things I don't do are like real estate, things like that.
Okay. And over 10 years ago now, we sat down when I put together a book before all this internet stuff took off and YouTube, and you shared your story, a little piece of your story in that book. And there are some fascinating pieces to that. And I'm so happy to sit down today because I want to go deeper into your story. I think you have a fascinating life. And can you start out, tell us about where you grew up and what your childhood was like?
Well, I mean, childhood part is easy. I was spoiled rotten, sort of a lower middle class existence, and basically normal almost. And what happened to me was my parents wanted to move up in the world, etc. So they wanted to move from Manhattan to Queens, which is what they did. At the time, I was in 6th grade, and I can't remember exactly, but they had what they called the SP class then. It was a special class that allowed you to go do 3 years in 2. And my game plan at that point was I wanted to go to Bronx Science, and it's sort of a goody two-shoes. When we get to Queens, the Board of Education, I don't know who, somebody in the school, could have been just the principal, but said, you're not going to SP, you're going to go into a regular 7th grade class. And, I said, I'm not. My parents thought I was kidding or whatever they thought, but, Ronnie, you have to go to school. I said, I do not. And I said, I'm not going back. And I didn't. And that's where I started on from being a normal kind of kid to not going to school. And the first few months, or up to a year maybe, truant officer would, come around looking, and, I'd be hiding in the bushes and throwing rocks at him. So that finally stopped, and they called up my parents, and they said, either you get him to school or we're going to put him in a reform school. My father said, you try that, I'll put him in a yeshiva, and I went back and forth like that for a few years. And then, so I was out of school for quite a while. Ended up at the racetrack, because it was hard to get a job with no license, no working papers, nothing, right? So I ended up at the racetrack walking horses and then riding them as an exercise boy, and got into gambling as well, so I was going through a lot of money.
And are you a teenager at this point?
Right, 15, 16, 17. And by the time I was 17 or 18 maybe, I had my own little crime spree going. I was out on bail in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, Bronx, and Westchester County. And Westchester County was very interesting, because I had never been in Westchester County, but I had promised to cooperate with police in Manhattan for one of the arrests that was going on there. When it came time to cooperate, I said no. So they literally took me out to Westchester County, took me into some department store, put me in front of a cashier, says, is this the guy that passed the check? They said yes. So I had all of those charges pending, and they all got wrapped up, and they had to bring me back to Westchester to, get a concurrent sentence, right? And by then I was at Sing Sing. So when I got to the Westchester jail, which was in Valhalla, it was like a country club, right? So I told one of the COs that I was an illegal alien, and then they called immigration. So I screwed things up there, so I ended up staying there for months when I should have just been there over the weekend. Went back to Sing Sing, and from Sing Sing, I went to Attica because of shenanigans I was doing at Sing Sing. From Attica, my family put up a major bitch. So they brought me back down to Green Haven. And from Green Haven, there was an English teacher that helped me out in terms of making an application to Suny Binghamton. When I tried to do it like sort of a legitimate way, like with the parole board, they said, why should we parole you? You're just going to be a smart crook. So they weren't in favor of my getting into Binghamton or going to college at all. So I did get in with the help of this English teacher. And that's the short version of how I got here.
Wow. But what was the crime? What was the scheme? What were you doing?
Almost everything. Nothing real violent. Manhattan, I was getting credit cards from prostitutes. Back then, it would take them 10 days to get basically on the list. So for 8 days, you knew you were pretty safe using the card. So doing that, the crime that I got the 4 years for where I sold 2 racehorses. I sold 1 racehorse that didn't exist. And then...
Wait, you sold a racehorse that didn't exist?
Correct. In other words, I made up the name of the horse, papers and all of this. I took a Blue Cross insurance policy, substituted language, and then at the bottom put in a clause about swamp fever, so it made it look like it was for animals. And then sold it to this person that I ran into at the track, and then started billing him, for keeping the stable and all that kind of stuff. We called the course New Country, of all things, right? But in any event, by the time it was done, the DA's office went nuts. And the way they arrested me, they wanted him to set me up, to just continue like we were doing our thing, right? So we're in a car, and all of a sudden I see twisting his right pocket. And I said, they're recording this. So I turned to him and I said, look, I don't know what you're telling your wife you're doing with this money, but look, don't blame me for it, right? When that happens, about 6 cars come and they pull up, 2 in front, 2, and 1 million cops with guns and all of that. And I had never had a weapon. So that was a big arrest. And then that, by the time I was done, was matured into a 4-year prison sentence.
And how old are you now at this point?
17 or 18.
Okay.
So that was when, it was a while back.
And is that the time? So after that day, did you go to prison?
Ultimately, yeah. I mean, I was out on bail for that for a while, and then I got rearrested a few more times. By the time I finished all of that, there were 6 different charges. Not charges. Bronx alone was 115 counts of grand larceny and about 25 forgeries. I mean, the DA took everything I signed and made it a charge. So they overcharged me like ridiculous. But ultimately, it was April Fool's Day that I entered Sing Sing. And I think that was 68.
Unbelievable.
So.
And how long did you spend?
Around 3 years. I lost good time for some of the stuff that, I wasn't a model prisoner, but...
So were you a bad kid, like a troublemaker? Would you call yourself a troublemaker? And were you acting alone?
Most of the time, everything was alone, with me. I never did any gang stuff or anything like that. And I don't know what you'd call trouble. I was stealing, I was more of a con man. Like, when I was inside, I was selling high school diplomas that didn't exist to other inmates. I told them, look, I know somebody in Albany. I would pick people that I thought could pass the test. I said, you just take it and I'll guarantee you passing grade. And you get 6 cartons of cigarettes and nonsense like that. So.
But you were being smart about everything you were doing. You were trying to figure out how to beat the system.
Sort of. I mean, didn't have a lot of options in it.
Right.
So, but, after I got out, I was really lucky to get into Suny. And, from then on, it's just been a roll, so to speak.
So I have to ask you, the system itself, would they look at your case or your life as the ultimate success story? Of someone who was arrested, spent time in prison, gets into a university, passes the bar, and then becomes a very successful attorney?
Well, I think it really would depend on, whether you are conservative or liberal. You could see some people saying this guy got a free ride, he belongs in jail, he shouldn't have been allowed to practice law in the first place, and now he's just an ambulance chaser, From the liberal vantage point, I think that people would say this is a good example of if you provide the opportunity to people, then they will use it wisely and then be successful and so on.
So what do you have to say about second chances, Ron?
Well, I mean, I started a group called Probe, which was just for ex-offenders. It was an agency designed to do just that. When I was in college, it started, and then it went on for quite a while. It's a philosophy I hold today, is that when you have young people doing one or another thing wrong, you do not wrap them up in the criminal justice system, because all they're going to do is learn how to commit more crime. They're not going to be rehabilitated. You're just poisoning them. So the agency, when I ran it, was aimed at hardcore felons, 3-time losers, people in their 20s and up. And I was always advocating for first offenders to keep them out of the criminal justice system completely. So, I mean, I think that...
To give them a better chance, right?
Yeah, that's right. Not to wrap them up in that system that, everything is manipulative. And, with welfare, one of the things that still drives me nuts, where there used to be a man in a house rule, and women that were on public assistance that were having relationships with men. I mean, it's normal. They would, and welfare inspectors would come around from time to time knocking on the door. You got young children, 3, 4 years old, and they're being taught how to lie. Tell them Daddy's not here, or tell them Melvin's not here. Lie to the basic inspector. And these kids grow up with that. So, they're behind the 8 ball before they ever get to school even. So, a lot of systemic issues that really need to be dealt with. And, prison is a revolving door for a lot of those people.
So you come to SUNY Binghamton at the time, and you enter as a freshman?
Yeah.
Okay. And tell us what happens from there. How do you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm going to become an attorney? Well,
when I I had culture shock, put it mildly. Everybody's running around in dungarees and all this other stuff, and it's so informal, it was really a surprise. And I ended up doing well in school. I mean, hadn't gone to high school, so that this was like a jump from basic nothing to college. And that first semester, at the end of it, I wrote a letter to the editor. I wanted to be a letter to the editor about prison reform and trying to get other people breaks and so on. The pipe dream turned into a front page article, and then I got a ton of student responses, and that's how the agency Probe started. Harris Thompson was the director of Urban League, and John Benson was director of the special admissions program that I came through. Those 3 guys, kind of took me under their wing in terms of how to run an agency and get staff, get funding, do this, do that. And by the end of the second semester, I got in the Department of Labor to give us office space. I got Unitarian Church, graduate student government, and the Office of Economic Opportunity to give us grants. So we actually had a little staff. And then I would try to guerrilla IBM, say, if you don't hire so many, ex-cons, then we're going to make it look like, you're doing things improperly. And so they got into the act, a few other places. And, so we were actually getting jobs for people and doing things here and there.
And I can't help but think now you're using your street smarts to your advantage for this agency that you started.
Right.
Wow. And it sounds like you're putting together things that probably never happened or typically didn't exist, as far as a college kid being able to put an agency together and have a staff.
Well, it was sort of rare, I think that these things just all came together, and it worked out all right. There were a lot of failures too. A lot of people just used us, and my thing, look, you use me all the hell you want. You're the one going back to jail, not me. So you either carry a lunch bucket or you plan on, making a round trip back to prison.
Does that agency exist today?
No. Actually, it's only the last 2 years, I don't know. A couple of years ago, they decided to make it a subordinate part of either OFB or somewhere else. I don't remember exactly. But technically it lost its identity. So it's gone on for a while. But it got, the way it ultimately ended up existing for years and years was day and night difference from what I wanted. It ended up, they hired some guy named Pete or somebody. He's an idiot. He had some scream therapy, which may or may not work. But I actually was in law school by then. I came back here. Frank Barish, who's the president of Visions for whatever, he was on the board. He was the chair at that time. And basically I said, you can't keep this guy. And they told me, you don't run this place anymore. I said, yes, I do. And the whole board resigned except for Frank. We put together a new board, and then they ended up hiring this woman called Pearl Mall, who came out of Macy's as some kind of executive, whatever. And she just wanted to work with first offenders. I said, what the hell are you doing? And I said, either I'm going to quit law school, come back here, or I'm kissing it. And that's what I did. I never looked back. I just stayed in law school. And Probe ended up serving a clientele that, from my vantage point, never should have been in the criminal justice system in the first place.
Okay. And it sounds like it definitely wasn't even close to your original plan.
That's right.
So where did you go to law school?
Buffalo. And, that was sort of normal, get used to. I mean, I was working because I didn't have any resources from anywhere. I was working with an agency that worked with ex-cons in Buffalo. And then passed the bar, then had a scrabble with the appellate division. In fact, the character committee split on me. They asked me, are you willing to make restitution for all the money that that you've stolen? I said, absolutely. You give me back my 4 years, I'll give you all the money back I took. And so I pissed a few of them off. They split down the middle, and it was, had to go to the appellate division. And then the appellate division admitted me. And I started practicing law. And I know I pissed off a lot of so-called community whatever, because it was a matter of a year or two. I got suspended for 6 months. And, if you read the suspension, you look at it and you look at what other people do, you're going to say, what the hell is this? And the appellate division, said I was abusing my authority as an attorney. And I think what led them to that conclusion was this real estate agent was ripping off newspaper boys. He went through 3-4 of these kids. They delivered the paper, and he just wouldn't pay them. So they came to me. I ended up suing him, and I asked for $1.3 million in punitive damages. And the appellate division said, that's abusing your authority as an attorney, and blah, blah, blah. That was the gist of it.
So they suspended you.
So I got hit with a 6 months suspension then. And beyond that, I've been hit with ethics complaints more than anybody else anywhere as far as I'm concerned. And what I think the reason for that is community that I serve, so to speak, that I work with hard. Mothers had their children taken away. Minority issues from left, right, and sideways. And what will happen is if you don't get a result favorable, they don't have anybody to strike out with except me. So you get these complaints. And so, it happens. And there wasn't anything, sometimes it's censured, sometimes it's dismissed. And I don't practice what I call candy-ass law, like some doctors practice candy-ass medicine, test everybody so you can't get sued and all that. I don't do that crap. And more times than not, especially with some of the civil rights litigation, I will know in advance that the law is not what I'm saying it is. And then when I run into these judges, right, that say, where is it? And I said, look, our principles are stare decisis. We're supposed to develop the law. Here are the facts. There should be this law. And sometimes we get a little bit, sometimes we don't. I remember one time in front of Judge McKern making an argument on education, constitutional argument, right? I'm trying to argue expanding the Constitution. There has to be enough elasticity for you to bring this into play, right? And he looks dead at me and he said, the Constitution is not a rubber band, Mr. Benjamin, and go back to your drawing board. So, those are kinds of things that I've run into just doing the civil rights.
So I would like to talk about some of your cases, but before we do that, was there a moment that you remember where things turned around for you? So back, you got into trouble, you went into jail, you get the opportunity, but what was that? Was there an aha moment that you said, I don't want to do that anymore, I want to become an attorney?
No.
How did it unfold?
I mean, the attorney part was more, the lesson I thought I took with me from Probe was you're not going to make systemic change here. And, you can do a lot more, I thought, as a lawyer. And therefore I went to law school instead of kind of staying in that area. But, when you look at these moral decisions, so to speak, in other words, at some point does the light go off and say, look, you got to become an honest, law-abiding citizen? The answer there is no. I think that the issues were always, at some level, as a pendulum, over here is perfectly moral, over here is completely corrupt. But to do the analysis the correct way, you got to look at who's writing these laws. So when I'm sitting there looking at laws written by landlords, and I'm representing tenants, those laws, as far as I'm concerned, are totally unjust.
Because they're skewed.
Exactly. So that, it was never, this majesty of the law was more a practical, functional. If I didn't get into college, I'd still be out stealing and doing it quite well, so to speak. And one of the interesting things that, I thought about when I was in college and the way the system was working, and you probably could still do it now, you could literally create a city, create a population, and then just apply for federal grants. Bring those federal grants back into some, baloney bin and rip off millions of dollars. That's how screwed up the system is in a lot of ways.
Does that concern you?
They can't see the forest for the trees, but, what concerns me, is right now, instead of running the country, instead of figuring out how to, on the domestic side, come up with some equity, create some opportunity, create some jobs, get industry back here, we're running around with a lot of theatrical nonsense about impeachment, hearings held, everybody grandstands, those then get put into some bin, never to be seen again. And that's a ton of money, ton of resources going into absolutely nothing. So that concerns me more than, I suppose $600 toilet seats and stuff like that from the Defense Department. You always have those boondoggles. But, I'm wasting an awful lot of time and energy on nothing.
What's your take, while we're talking about that, what's your take on what's going to happen here with the impeachment of the president?
Well, I think the problem is Democrats know as soon as they stop and they impeach, the stage goes to the Republicans. So I think they're going to keep horsing around with this for as many months as they can get away with. Republicans right now don't appear willing to take Trump on. So it doesn't matter if they impeach him or not, he's going to walk. So it's just a big boondoggle.
And a lot of wasted time, resources, etc.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So now you're practicing. You come back to Binghamton, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Did you open your practice here?
Right. Yep.
Okay. And why? Because you had a good experience at the school?
Well, no, because I knew from my probe involvement, I got a fair amount of publicity just for some of the things we did then. Like at one point, social services would not, the jail would not recognize, social services would not recognize the jail as an address, which means you could not apply, you walked out with nothing. So we demonstrated in front of social services, shut them down literally, and worked out some deal there. Back then it was that kind of thing, more functional towards jobs, towards things like that. But and the other thing was they were trying to defund OFB, Opportunities for Groom, for not following federal regs. So I saw that the feds were not following their own regs. So I represented OFB. We got them funded again. And, between all of the press like that, when I came back set up, it was amazing because I opened up in September of '79. And by December, I made like $40,000, which to me was like a mountain of money. I said, what the hell, this is a pretty good deal here, right? And I was doing things for people that, stopping evictions, things like that.
Making a difference.
So doing that and making money. So that, worked out. The idea to come here, start, and then that went on for about 10 years. I was doing really nicely. And then a case came along from a drug called diethylstilbestrol. It took me months to figure out how to pronounce it. It's called DES, and it was a drug that they used in the 40s and 50s. These researchers from Harvard, Smith and Smith, came in with the theory that it prevented pregnancy. So the drug companies, what DES was synthesized estrogen. The drug companies were falling all over themselves because the guy that invented them, Mr. Dodd, did not patent it because he wanted to be used widespread because he thought it would be doing good for the world. So they're running around promoting this drug like crazy, and they end up pushing doctors. So everybody's using DES. And it turns out that it was the first transplacental carcinogen, crossed the placenta, and it basically injured the reproductive tract of the babies, of the mothers that were taking the drug. So I get a woman from Owego who had a vaginal cancer because of it. And by then, the big New York City firms were fighting the drug companies in Manhattan over how it was going to go, and it was sort of at a stalemate. And I came down and said, I want a trial, right? And I'm positive the drug company said, look, we'll take this bare-faced idiot from Binghamton, take him, beat the case, show everybody you're not going to win.
Set precedent.
Exactly. So that's what we did, and except they lost. We got $12.5 million.
Wow.
And it turned things around with the DES world. And, my practice that I ended up suing pharmaceuticals for years and doing pretty good doing that. And I was still doing civil rights, but it was, not at the top of the list, so to speak.
And that brings up fen-phen.
Fen-phen. That was another boondoggle with drugs supposedly causing loss of weight. Instead, it caused heart attacks, and they got pulled from the market, and then we were litigating again with the drug companies about damages and so on.
And this was what, back in the 90s?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I recall, if I remember correctly, that you were either on the cover or somewhere within the Wall Street Journal for that case. Is that right?
Well, it was one of the things. I think that there was the combination of doing that and coming out of jail, whatever. They thought, he was a unique guy, so they did a front page article on it.
And Ron, back then, do you think those cases, the ones you were involved with and other attorneys, has that helped the consumer in any way today from what pharmaceuticals are putting out? Or do you still see some of the same problems that happened back then continue?
I mean, it's an interesting question, and it's a little more complicated than what, it's easy to go out and say that drug companies are bandits and all that. I mean, they make money like anybody else. The problem is, that no matter what drug you come up with, until it really hits the marketplace and you get a large enough population, so to speak, you're not going to really know, because you do these clinical trials and they're rarely going to give you statistical significance on causation. Now, they like to gamble a little bit, and they'll say, well, you know that this drug will promote this issue, but then the side effects aren't really considered, and you look at all these commercials. Today, they warn you about everything from a toenail loss to horrible death, and that's to avoid liability. But the practical side that they face is no matter how good the drug is and how much time goes into it, a clinical trial is not going to be sufficiently large to give you the kind of data you need. And so you got that on the one hand. The other hand, it's unethical to withhold a drug from people that you know could benefit. So that just is going to go round and round. Probably the best way to have a fair system is to take it out of the legal system, put it into an administrative system that says, if ultimately we find that this drug causes this damage, then you will be entitled to so much, and they'll put together some kind of impartial board that develops some mechanism. But, that's not going to happen because neither side's going to give in. But, it's an ongoing thing, and I don't know that anything we did in the 90s changed it. I think that, the plaintiff side had their share of corruption where, you just throw everybody in there no matter what. You got a twinkle of a dust and bingo, you got an injury, So that's that.
Ron, what about tobacco companies? I don't know. I never smoked. I understand that people smoke. It's a habit. I know you smoked and quit, right?
Yeah.
I just can't wrap my brain around how this is legal. When we know, and I know it's a tough subject, people don't like to talk about it because tobacco's so big and they have so much power. But from a health reason, I guess I should ask you this question. In 100 years from now, will tobacco exist?
Well, 100 years from now, they may have a tobacco that is healthy and is going to be prescribed for various kinds of illnesses. So, the real issue there is, there's a number of issues, one of which is, you've gotten warnings from here to the end of the time that this is not good for your health, so why are you smoking in the first place? But, tobacco companies have made this part of your culture, from the shirt pockets that they promote and make sure that are on every shirt in the country to, the Marlboro Man and on and on and on. I sued back in, must have been 20 years, maybe more. I sued the tobacco companies, and I remember for a case I had, one guy, there was a room full of lawyers, 20, 30 lawyers came up, and that's what they do to you. They just guerrilla you. And then they made motions, and Judge McAvoy dismissed my tobacco case on the grounds that it wasn't a product, it was agriculture, and therefore you couldn't bring a product liability claim. Now, that's been overruled since then. But, the tobacco companies, like now, look at the opioid crisis. This is the opioid crisis is where the tobacco companies ended up, 20 years ago, and then ultimately they've been settling cases left, right, and sideways. And it's the same thing with the opioid crisis. And, there's always two sides to every issue, and there's always going to be some harm emanating from some product, and then you're going to balance these different interests and end up with situations. They take pajamas that are so flammable that they can't be sold in the United States. They don't junk the product, they go take it and sell it overseas. So, everybody's chasing the dollar, so to speak.
I heard that you once used Skittles or M&Ms or something as an exhibit. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
That was the DES case where I got the $12 million. The attorney for Eli Lilly, to show the Lilly pill, okay, it was a red pill and was the size of M&M, right? And so they open it in front of the jury with a big box and they unraveled the box, and there's a certificate, all this other nonsense, right? So after he does that in front of the jury, I open up, it was an M&M actually, an M&M same size, and it said, this is what that is worth, and this is what it does, and so on. But, the funnier part in that case was they hired an epidemiologist from Yale to come in and talk about how statistics, we were not able to show a statistical significance between Lily's pill and the onset of the vaginal cancer. And this guy was just blowing out smoke, numbers, just ridiculous, right? So, there's no way if I'm going to go toe-to-toe with him on these numbers, he's going to get anything but confusion, right? So I said to him, Doctor, now I'd like you to tell the jury about the LL formula. And, he goes like one of those, right? He thinks he's supposed to know the LL formula, right? And, Mr. Benjamin, I'm not sure what you're referring to. I said, come on, you know what the LL formula is. Everybody on the jury's going to know it. What? And Mr. Benjamin, what is the LL formula? I said, Lily loses. The judge had to turn his chair from the jury. And, that was, if you want to talk about a moment in the case, that was it.
That's priceless. So sometimes when you're up there, and I've actually gone in to watch you, some of your trials, because it's insightful, but it's almost, it's theatrical in some ways.
Theater, that's right.
How do you prepare, Ron?
Well, look, ask yourself this. How are you going to take strangers, a jury stranger, the judge, the other lawyer, and the plaintiff, who suffered some kind of injury or probably committed some kind of crime? How are you going to cram all the information, particularly in a complicated case? How are you going to get that done in it? The witness is up there for an hour, 3 hours, 5 hours, whatever. There has to be some theater to it. You have to find some sort of a soundbite. You have to have a theme.
And they don't teach you that in law school.
No, they don't. They should.
So is that experience?
I think so. Now, I can tell when a criminal case comes in the door, I can tell after the initial interview what my closing argument is going to be just about. Because you can see, you see them one, you see them all, and there are different variables that come into play. But, our system is not, the theory behind our system is that cross-examination is a crucible out of which the truth will emerge. But the fact of the matter is, people are not trained actors, and they'll either be scared or there'll be something you can get and impeach them with. It'll have nothing to do with the case, but you crush their testimony, which otherwise could have been valuable, So it's a theory that says the adversarial system will bring out the truth, but we have all kinds of rules, like hearsay, that are designed to submerge the truth and put other interests above. Whereas in the inquisitorial system, the attorney for the client has an obligation, if he knows the client's guilty, bring that before the court. Now, the problem with that system is it's subjected to abuse, so that the government can come in and just lock you up for no reason and keep you locked up. Well, look, we're talking about these kind of rules. What they used to do in medieval times, they would put a witness in a bag of rocks, throw the witness and the rocks down into the water. The witness came back up, he was telling the truth. Otherwise, if he drowned, he's guilty. So, we're at least better than that.
We're improving as a human race. Can you talk about any disappointing cases that you've had?
Well, sure. I think that one that comes to mind was a correctional officer that turned in other officers for beating an inmate. And then they went after him big time. He'd open his locker and there'd be a rat in there. They have these Sally Port doors where, you lock on both sides, lock him in there. It just made his life miserable to the point where he couldn't work. that was clearly a legitimate case that we would have gotten this guy a lot of money to compensate him for when he went through. So while this case is waiting for trial, the United States Supreme Court comes down with this Gariselli case, and it basically says that as a public servant, if you have a public employer, you really don't have any First Amendment rights, and therefore there's no retaliation. You cannot get the government, can't sue them, blah blah blah. So that case had to be lost. So that one,
Tough.
that was a very disappointing case.
It just seems like the rules of engagement change. That's a great example. I mean, is that now precedent?
Right, yeah. You
It
got to
is.
live with that one.
Right.
And, the system, in many ways, trial is a crapshoot because you get one judge as opposed to another judge, and even locally. Certain judges have predispositions toward ruling in favor of government, whatever it is. But depending on who you get, you're going to either win or lose that case, depending on the kind of case it is.
Do you typically know that going into it? Do you have a good idea? Or
Well, no, it's a random assignment
Ah,
system. So after you get the case, once you file the case and then you get the judge, well then you got to sort of shift your strategy to accommodate that judge's particular bent. That's what Trump's going to have an impact no matter what happens in the next 2 years. He's appointed more federal judges than you shake a stick at. And what you're going to see is a shift. There's a doctrine called right versus privilege. And historically, since the 50s, 60s, things have moved in favor of the have-nots, so to speak. Prisoners have been allowed to have a right to get good time. Welfare recipients have a right to get a certain amount of public assistance and so on. You're going to see that shift, and you're going to see it erode. And we're going to go back to the old, it's a privilege, not a right, and therefore we will leave it to the discretion of the particular agency. And I think you're going to see an erosion of a lot of the rights that have been granted, so to speak, by the courts that have been running for the last 50 years.
why do you advocate so hard for your clients?
Well, easy way to win it to win it. I think that that's part of the process. I've never been 9 to 5, regardless. And a lot of the clients that I end up in those situations with are clients that don't have anywhere else to go, literally. So I just do.
And what's a typical day for you? Do you have a dozen cases going on at once? I know you have a trial you mentioned this week. Are you clearly focused on that, or do you have to answer questions on other things that are happening? I would just love a sense of what your life is like day to day.
Well, the trials are not that often. They may take up a quarter of the year. So the rest of it's filtering out cases. I get a lot of calls from all over the place. And somehow, I'll give you an example of a whack-ball scenario where I have 2 ladies come in, nice, elderly, whatever. They claim the federal government, the post office, and the FBI are all trailing them, and they want to nail them and this and that. And so I'm trying to be courteous. All right, ladies, but look, you just can't sue everybody in the government. You have to have certain things to do. And every example, you have to show that this was done to you. That was done to me. So I finally said, look, I need a $10,000 retainer or else I'm not going to be able to sue. Out comes a checkbook, okay? So when the checkbook came out, I got up, I walked out to my secretary. I said, Kathy, they're yours. Get them the hell out of here somehow. I'm going. So I left.
Wow.
You will get people that are delusional or whatever. So you get some of that. I've got one woman that's been calling me for 25 years, 20 years. And, just, Ron, I got this, But it's, generally a lot of it is the prep work. If you don't really prep, because you don't know how certain, let's say you got 8 different possibilities that could happen. If you don't prepare for them, you're going to get nailed.
So in many ways, it's like a NFL coach, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You have to be ready for all these scenarios.
That's right.
No matter what play is thrown at you.
That's
how
right.
to defend, how to react.
If you don't, you can't be a trial lawyer. I mean, in my view, And I think most trial lawyers are like that. One of my issues locally, and it's mirrored throughout much of the United States, is that minorities historically will never have anywhere near the adequate peer representation when they are facing trial, either civilly or criminally. And, I have, often gone to trial locally in criminal cases, black defendants. You look back and you got nothing but a sea of white jurors. And, they just feel like they're cooked before they even start. And it's an issue.
Why does that happen?
Well, primarily, in our area, there's only minor minority representation in the first place. But the voter registration lists are where we get our jurors from, for the most part. And so I think it's got to be a combination of having our commissioner of jurors look to other sources of voter registration, which I would hope churches could be one of those. And then the other side of that would be to get minorities to register to vote so that they're on those lists that are being used. And, that combination would hopefully then get us a better group of jurors in terms of, when we say peer representation, it really will be peer representation, not white peer representation.
Right. Do you think it's the same in larger cities? Take Philadelphia, for example, or New York.
Well, I've tried a few cases in Manhattan, and it's been the same there. Well, you have a little better chance of getting black jurors in Manhattan. But, it's a national problem, particularly for some areas.
So what does it do to the chances of that, of your client?
I think that to the extent you're going to get some jurors that harbor prejudice, whether it's, they never work, they don't get up in the morning, they're on welfare, blah, 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 whatever it is, it's there, and it obviously manifests itself in, instead of having a presumption of innocence, you got a presumption of guilt, A difficult problem.
What's next for Ron Benjamin?
Well, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing.
You love it.
I do.
I ask a lot of the guests this because I just like to know from different perspectives. What's the purpose of life? Why are we here? What's our mission?
Well, that's a fair enough question. We're going to get any answers to it. Because really, it's a blink. Your life, my life, is going to be a blink. It's going to go out. So, sometimes you think, well, maybe there is no purpose. You just go become like every animal out there, and you just move on and don't ask any questions. And it's one of the things that drove me from religion when, I asked my rabbi about, if there's really a God, how could that God let so many miserable things happen to people? And why do all these bad people get away with all these things? And, the answer I got was God works in mysterious ways, and that didn't do it for me.
Yeah. But if you think about the bigger picture, you're right. We're here for such a short period of time. Life has been going on for millions of years. Who knows how far into the future? But don't you feel there's something out there that connects us? I mean, you've had these moments, I'm sure, where you're thinking of someone and they call you on the phone, or, oh, that was a coincidence, or don't you feel like there's a connection somewhere with people in general, of all races, religions, cultures?
I would like to feel that, okay? But I'm sort of too pragmatic, in terms of, is there some scheme, and then does that mean that I'm going to be programmed to play this role no matter what, almost like predestination? Or is there a field out there where you gotta make your own rules, make your own luck, and just wherever it lands, and under that theory, try to do the best you can? That's really the logic question. Ideally, sure. Nobody wants to think that, dirt to dirt, mud to mud, and when I'm gone, that's it. You'd like to be able to say, I can't wait to see my parents. I can't wait to get to the hereafter for whatever reason, right? That's why prayer is such comfort. If you can internalize and believe it, makes life a lot easier to kind of look at the end. I'm going to be somewhere else. But, I don't buy that.
Any advice for up-and-coming attorneys thinking about this as a career? What would you tell them?
Well, I think that if they're up-and-coming attorneys, they're going to do okay regardless of where they fall. But I think that, with, being an officer of the court, if you would, and there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of ability to influence lives, and, I would always hope that you work toward improving the community that you're in, basically.
Yeah. And if you were to take out your cell phone right now and call the 15-year-old Ron, would you give him any advice?
It would depend on what those, the 15-year-old is going to have issues, okay? And it'll depend on what those issues are, what you have to work through, if you're struggling, if you're being bullied, if you're having issues about your own identity. And, I think I try to tailor my advice to moving that person in a way that look at the reality, look at your own internal components. You're going to be able to cope with this, and this is how you're going to do it. And you got to get up. You get knocked down one time, you got to get back up. Don't let them knock you out like that.
And Ron, one last question. First of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. It's fascinating. I believe people are going to really take to this episode because you are so real, and that's why we named the show American Real. It's real stories. And this is what I love, to have a deeper conversation with people so they could share some of the wisdom that they've had or lessons that they've learned over the years. So thank you for coming on.
My pleasure.
But one last question, and that is, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think that I would just like to be remembered as trying to do something the right way. About it.
Ron Benjamin, thank you so much. Welcome to the American Real family.
Thank you.